Okay, obviously I've got a lot to get through, so I will try to make this part 2 video as succinct as I possibly can. So, as a wise man once said, allons-y. Although I've been able to do so in other suites, maintaining story continuity was not realistic. I tried to connect segments with a similar character, but the smoothest musical choices were to connect cues of a similar harmony. In many cases, the two went together. Scene 1 virtually demanded music from the Sunmakers, the story that heralded the return, for those who noticed, of the theme. 3 of the 4 cues from that story make up the first scene. For me, there was no other choice but to start proceedings with the gorgeous music from Part 4. As the Doctor works to sabotage the Collector's desk alarm, then Leela draws his attention to a safe in the back of this office, whereupon the Doctor starts cracking. A floaty intro begins, the bass clarinet handing off to the clarinet, joined by the vibraphone. A steady bass note of A natural prepares us for a D minor version of the theme. The bells handle the melody solo, accompanied by lightly bouncing harmony in the muted horns and clarinets. This is the same key in which we last heard a fully fledged version of the theme back in Season 14's opener, The Mask of Mandragora, but that was 9 stories and 15 months ago. Notice the D bass remaining constant and the diatonic harmony instead of the whole step shift we've heard in most previous versions. We are in for a multitude of rhythmic and harmonic variations on the theme. As this first cue ends with a metallic-sounding clunk, the Sunmakers' music is interrupted by the briefest theme reprise, 5 seconds from Part 1 of Season 17's Nightmare of Eden. Here, the Doctor and Romana exit the TARDIS to discover a bit of a mishmash between 2 spaceships. Starting on D minor but ending on an enigmatic E natural, this clip was helpful in reinforcing the theme and also as a transition to the next clip from the Sunmakers. That clip, in fact, comes shortly after the introductory music, as the Doctor successfully cracks the safe, slowly pulls it open, and he and Leela peer inside. This beautifully subtle segment features pulsing suspended chords surrounded by motive melody 2 octaves apart. I love the final chord, which adds up to a whole tone scale on top of the foreign D natural. The chord is D minor major 7, but the flat 9 color tone is a special treat. The conclusion of Scene 1 comes from the second of 2 brief motive-based ideas in Part 2. The Doctor is released from his straitjacket in the correction center and makes to leave with his escort, but he surprises his new friend Bisham by leaving him a bag of jelly babies. In the original recording, there is a mistake by one of the melodic instruments in the first measure, so I had to make my best guess as to what Simpson's intention actually was. Notice that in all 3 of the Sunmaker segments from Scene 1, there is a concluding musical gesture, a rapid, whimsical rising of fourths, fifths, and tritones in the vibraphone and organ. With Scene 1 acting as a reintroduction of the Doctor's theme and motive, the remaining 6 scenes show the breathtaking creativity in Simpson's reuse of these beautifully simple and malleable ideas. Scene 2 might be characterized as skulking or tiptoe music. Starting us off is a clip from Part 5 of the Armageddon Factor, the 6th segment of the Key to Time. The Doctor emerges from the TARDIS into the dark, mysterious lair of the Shadow. He tries to find Romana and Princess Astra, who have gone ahead of him, but the Shadow's world is full of trickery, and an optical illusion of the 2 ladies disappears. The electric organ and vibraphone melody is a stretched-out version of the theme in A minor, but the horn ensemble reacts with punching chords in totally different keys, mostly minor major 9 chords. Later, the muted horns take the melody that include the theme in F minor, and the bells and a twinkly organ timbre represent the illusions. Take note of the juggling necessary to play the doubled melody as well as the punchy chords. This passage is amongst the most fun to play. Next, a literal tiptoe piece of music from Part 4 of The Androids of Tara, the fourth segment of the Key to Time. The Doctor has infiltrated Castle Gracht, found the laboratory where Romana was almost dismantled, and locates the segment that the Count has confiscated. Having done so, he leaves as stealthily as he came. The tiptoe part in the center of this clip is obvious, but what thrilled me about transcribing this was the count them, three Doctor's motives located in the bookend measures. The first one is obvious because it opens the clip, solo vibraphone. The second is the immediate reply in the muted horns, and is the original all's well that ends motive beautifully harmonized. Finally, as the Doctor tiptoes away, the vibraphone and cello with bass clarinet depart in contrary motion, the vibraphone beginning with another Doctor's motive. What a subtle treasure. Next up is a theme-based clip from Part 2 of The Pirate Planet, the second segment of the Key to Time. The Doctor has successfully opened a locked hatchway using his sonic screwdriver and a bent hairpin, but he is at first unaware of his success. His new friend, Kimus, is astounded, and when he realizes they both enter the hatchway into a cave passage. Back in D minor, the opening strains of the theme are in a staggered rhythm supported by harmonic pulses. I love the crescendo towards the end as the timpani and bass clarinet urgently shift from triple to quadruple rhythms, yet the horns stay in triplets. Augmented chords with twinkly organ above complete this clip. Concluding Scene 2, we return to the Androids of Tara, this time in Part 3, as the Doctor and K9 arrive early to a pavilion, where he plans to negotiate the release of Romana from Count Grendel's clutches. This clip is slow, quiet, and features the D minor theme in the low register, largely in the cello. The concluding vibraphone line comes from the following scene, but it was too lovely for me to ignore. On to Scene 3, commencing with 4 consecutive clips from The Stones of Blood, the third segment of the Key to Time. This is one of the 2 stories where Simpson filled his score with theme and motive music. The first 3 are all from Part 1, while the last comes from Part 2. First, the Doctor and Romana emerge from the TARDIS onto a grassy plot of land, the Doctor presently discarding his umbrella, while Romana sees Earth for the first time. The vibraphone plays the D minor theme in a slightly syncopated, bouncy rhythm and in a high register, while the organ and horn ensemble support with bouncy chords, plus a long inner voice from the cello. The left hand has a lot to do in this brief segment. As the clip resolves on a surprise B major, the vibraphone has a ringing, slightly dissonant falling line, reminiscent of the ending to the second movement. Next, the Doctor has left Romana in the care of Professor Rumford and Vivian Fay at the Stone Circle, and begins his journey across the moor to visit Mr. de Vries's house. This buoyant passage is based on a triadic harmonization of the motive, the clarinet supported by the organ with accents below by the strings and bass clarinet. This little passage is well worth further discussion by me, but is largely using the white keys of the piano. That gives it a slight resemblance to a memorable passage from Season 2's The Chase. See my episode 12. The third passage from Part 1 is one of the longer continuous segments I transcribed, clocking in at about 35 seconds. This consists of the Doctor arriving at the gates of de Vries's house, walking up the long driveway, and eventually ringing the doorbell. De Vries and Martha are concluding a druidic ceremony to the Cailleach, and seem to know that the Doctor was coming. This passage is awesome, and here's why. First of all, it's filled with motive and theme, initially in the timpani and tenor sax, then passed to the muted horn ensemble in the latter half. Secondly, Simpson made the extraordinary decision to base his music in 5-beat groups, not 4s and 2s, perhaps because he needed 35 seconds of music. It's not obviously in this odd meter. In fact, it has a really nice groove. so for me it was a wonderful discovery. The fourth passage from the Stones of Blood comes in part 2. The Doctor and K9 arrive back at DeFreeze's house that evening, only to hear terrible screams and violence coming from within. As they enter, there's a terrible stillness in the house and the music. The motive uses the rhythm of the theme, and as it rises in intensity, Simpson uses his common trick of rising parallel minor chords in the harmony. I also use my own trick, as the solo muted horns representing the stillness are imitated on the piano by the same notes 3 octaves apart, like I did in episode 30's Charge of the Sisterhood. Now, we change gears for music from part 4 of Underworld, the story following the Sunmakers. The Doctor, back on the Minyan spaceship, has discovered the fake race banks are fission grenades and runs out of the ship to try to dispose of them. Leela and Edas run after him, but he is nowhere to be seen when they emerge. Leela intuits a direction to try, and they set off. Beginning with E minor, the theme has a false start, resolving upwards, again using parallel minor chords. Resolving one more time up to F sharp minor, we briefly see the Doctor run through the caves. Then, while the music becomes quiet and still, Leela and Edas emerge from the ship, pausing to consider. Once they set off, the music firmly resolves on F sharp. A 7-second connecting clip comes from part 2 of The Invasion of Time, the first of 11 clips from the season 15 finale, making it easily the most theme-intensive score Simpson contributed. Walking through the corridors of Gallifrey, shadowed by Leela, the Doctor bluffs his way past guards using the sash of Rassilon he is wearing. He is Lord President now, after all. Based on the original motive shape, it slips easily from B minor to E flat minor. Scene 3's final clip is in fact the last version of the Doctor's theme Simpson would write, heard in part 3 of Nightmare of Eden. Wiring up the power unit, the Doctor is confronted by a mandrel and evades it behind some of the panels in order to activate his rewiring. Or something like that. I'll explain later. This passage begins as a rather straightforward unison reading of the melody, first in D minor, then modulating to E minor. This is interrupted by a surprise chord, a bass clarinet solo, and my imitation of a shaker. There is a fair amount of shaker in this clip, but this is the only spot I could squeeze it in. Then follows the theme in E minor, modulating to F minor, but this melody is played in the middle register of the music, sandwiched between parts. The music ends abruptly through a less expected D flat 7 chord back to a unison F natural. Scene 4 begins with a short passage from part 4 of season 17's The Creature from the Pit, one of 2 clips found there. The Doctor and Romana have a brief walk to a meeting with the creature, Erato, now released from the pit, but they know that there is something Erato is not telling them. The Doctor's motive is mirrored in contrary motion below, and shortly begins a G minor version of the theme. The harmony hints at shifting a whole step down. We've heard only hints of that original harmonic movement so far in the piece. However, the melody does not continue at this point. Incidentally, the bells double the melody of the horn ensemble in the orchestration, but I couldn't do that without 3 hands. Music of the Stones of Blood returns next, the first of 3 further clips heard in this scene. In part 3, the Doctor is in Professor Rumford's house working on a device he hopes will beam him into hyperspace so he can rescue Romana. This quiet, insistent clip starts also in G minor, and the cello, tenor sax, and bass clarinet only hint at the theme. The parallel minor shift in harmony, however, is confirmed here. At the end of this long scene, the Doctor is ready to put his device into action, and he, Professor Rumford, and K9 head over to the stone circle. As this new scene begins, so does the longest of the clips I transcribed, clocking in at 1 minute 15 seconds. Here, as the Doctor confirms with Rumford what she has to do to operate the device, we receive a long reading of the theme in 3 different keys. In fact, the same modulation scheme as in the Nightmare of Eden clip we just heard. First, in D minor, the cello melody is accompanied by a buzzy organ timbre, rhythmically pulsing the harmony. Next, transposed to E minor, the melody rises to the clarinets, with counterlines by the tenor sax and cello. In order to portray these lines faithfully, the rhythmic accompaniment was relegated to the lower registers. Then, transposed to F minor, the melody returns to the cello with a counterline in the clarinets above. Now, as their discussion continues, a brief chorale leads to a rising crescendo, which I chose to represent by pulsing chords, since the piano cannot crescendo without them. The chords reach a wryly humorous peak, which then settles on A major, the dominant that helps us return to D minor and a literal reprise of this clip's opening. The music crescendos as Rumford prepares to throw the switch, and when she does, the music climaxes, transposing up to E flat minor through B flat minor to B flat major. I use B flat major as a dominant chord to lead into the next clip from part 4 of The Invasion of Time, after the Doctor successfully dismantles the quantum force field around Gallifrey. This brief clip slides from E flat minor to E minor. In fact, the final suspended chord has an F sharp in the bass, but I decided the melody doubled over 3 octaves was more important, so I distributed the notes accordingly. Amusingly, the next short clip, rising to F sharp minor, is actually from when the Doctor arrives to dismantle the force field, but it connected so nicely, I didn't worry about it. This clip, along with 2 other clips from The Invasion of Time, has a curious anomaly about it. It registers on my metronome at 62 beats per minute. This music always felt more urgent to me, and then the metronome proved it. I don't know why this would be. I suppose Simpson might have needed his music to be just that much shorter, but for all I know, someone set the metronome wrong. Whatever the reason, I give these 3 clips the slight urgency reflected in the original recording. In addition, music from episodes 3 and 4 of The Invasion of Time are amongst the rare original recordings that still exist. That was a relief to me because in the program there is a very loud sound effect over the final wash of harmony. The music became elementary to hear once I could listen to the separate recording. The end of scene 4 brings the final clip from The Stones of Blood, one of the last clips from part 4. As the Doctor lets K9 into the TARDIS, Romana and Professor Rumford walk and talk together. Here, for the first time in the suite, the music turns decidedly happier into a major key. E major and D major support the motive above before resolving with a slight punch to B major. We will soon see E major play a much more important part in the suite's structure. Scene 5 has a very tense character heard right from the outset, thanks to music from part 4 of The Androids of Tara. Guided by Zadek and Farah, the Doctor and K9 board a small boat in order to cross the moat and infiltrate Castle Gracht. After a dramatic introduction, the cello sustains long notes between plucked bass and thick staccato harmonies in the organ. These harmonies gain their color from a consistent minor second cluster at the bottom of each harmony, creating varieties of minor and dominant chords. After a series of drawn-out notes in the strings, the muted horns herald the appearance of the theme at last, but it's quickly cut off at the end of the scene. With barely any pause, we dive into the dramatic contrasts of a marvelous clip from Part 3 of Season 17's City of Death. If you're not familiar with that story, stick around for a couple episodes. Here, as a prisoner of Scarleone in Da Vinci's Florence workshop in 1505, naturally, the Doctor knocks out his guard, proceeds to write "This is a fake" on a group of blank canvases, and begins writing Dear Leo a letter. The punch is underscored by a musical flourish, the blur made by 3 notes in the right hand, 4 notes in the left hand. After landing squarely on C minor, the music settles and we get a sustained, subdued stream of 16th notes made of the Doctor's motive. Above, the horns calmly enunciate the harmonized theme, although the phrase dissolves before it can finish. After some long, creepy notes over very low bass organ pedals, the clip concludes with the earlier stream of notes broken up into triplet pairs. From here, the creepiness continues, with one more clip from part 4 of The Creature from the Pit. Here, the dust is still settling after Erato has crushed the evil Lady Adrasta, but having revealed its true nature is contrite, and the Doctor agrees to have it hoisted out of the pit. After a false start of the theme in F minor, we get a series of D minor harmonies led by a 1979 synthesizer. Apparently, technology had advanced enough to make the synthesizer a part of the band again. This accounts for the oscillating timbre that I reflect by echoing and rolling the same notes an octave lower. From a resolution to a E Phrygian chord, the theme emerges once again, and through some unexpected harmonies, the melody resolves on a very foreign G sharp minor. This leads to a calmer but no less tense clip from part 4 of the Ribos operation, the first segment of the Key to Time. The Doctor parts a curtain to observe a snowy courtyard below, where the Shreves clear the body of a guard killed by the maniacal Graf Vindicay just to get his way. As the horns quietly murmur various chords, the cello and organ play a pulsing version of the theme in E minor. The phrase tails off, and the cello issues a final comment. The conclusion of Scene 5 comes from the final climax in Part 4 of The Power of Kroll, the 5th segment of the Key to Time. Having obtained the segment, the Doctor must short-circuit the refinery's rocket firing bay, blocked due to bits of the late Kroll everywhere. Otherwise, the whole place will go up. The theme, again harmonized, is back to D minor, and for the only time, Simpson gives us a second consequent phrase of the theme, as if it finally might be a complete melody. However, that's a vain hope, for after an exciting mini-climax, the melody resumes in E minor, but with augmented harmony, upping the ante of the tension. Simpson then uses this augmented chord as a pivot into a new key of C sharp minor, and we get the theme one more time, leading into a series of intensifying chords peaking on G sharp dominant. By the way, as the controls fuse into safety, I'm virtually certain there is a final chord to this musical sequence, but the sound effects make it completely impossible to hear. Happily, the G sharp 7 chord makes a satisfying tension-filled ending to this scene. The harmony also made the perfect setup for the beginning of Scene 6, where the first clip is also in C sharp minor. Scene 6 is made entirely of music in triple meter, 6/8 time in this case. It made sense in the suite to put all these clips together and make an individual scene. And yes, that means another metric modulation. That C sharp minor clip is in fact the very first version of the theme's return in part 2 of The Sunmakers. The Doctor, straitjacketed in the correction center, lifts his legs up, swings himself into an upright position, and goes for a little hop. Short and comic in nature, we get an uncertain lead-in from the previous scene to a 1-5 progression ended by the clanging of bells. After an unmeasured pause, we have 2 very similar clips from Part 5 of The Invasion of Time, both where the Doctor and Barusa walk through the corridors of Gallifrey, avoiding Sontaran troops, mainly with their wits. Both feature the theme resolving on a minor major chord, a half step up from the original harmony. In the longer clip, the melody decays down in half steps until we get a series of deep rising organ chords, so deep that I had to break them up as usual. Meanwhile, the second clip does not elaborate. Then, another little gem from my researches. The coda to Part 4 of The Power of Kroll is a minute-long scene where the Doctor and Romana walk through the marshes back to the TARDIS, talking about the adventure just finished. Supporting these benign scenes is a delicate, extended version of the theme, again transposing from A minor through B flat minor to B minor. The transition between the later two keys is extended during a conversation about the existence of now normal-sized squids on this moon of Delta Magna, the way one does. The clip ends with a tremolo B7 flat 5 chord, a great example of the uncommon practice of Simpson using a harmony that would musically lead directly into the key of the theme song for the closing credits. This became far more common after Simpson left the program, and I've thought about doing a video on that very subject, but that's for later. Although the performer of the Renewal suite doesn't have to pause between each scene, I've instructed future generations of pianists to connect scenes 6 and 7 without pause. As the tremolo increases in volume, a long glissando down from the top of the piano imitates the screeching sound effect that leads into our favorite closing credits. Make no mistake, however, here, this leads directly into the final scene made of 6 clips entirely from the Invasion of Time. These bring a triumphant and major key ending to this epic suite. First is the last clip from part 5, where the Doctor and Barusa, with barely any dignity, run towards the TARDIS. With a repeated stirring bass line stretching a 12th, the theme is darkly harmonized, at last resolving on E major. This respite is short as the harmony flutters unexpectedly to a surprise B flat major. This leads into more Part 5 music with 2 almost identical clips of indefatigable stair climbing. But what's really indefatigable is the awesome presentation of the theme in its stirring form. Here, the harmony is even richer. Although the melody sounds like it's in B minor, it's harmonized in E minor. Technically, there is other music of Sontaran's stair climbing that separates these 2 clips, but they can have their own piece sometime, if they're lucky. A further clip from Part 5, as the Doctor and his band of merry aliens begin storming the President's office, starts with the same musical material down a whole step. The excitement ends with several surprising chords. A celebratory nod to the Doctor's motive comes from beautifully harmonized music in Part 3, where the Doctor arrives back at the TARDIS accompanied by a guard. Underneath the motive is bright timbred suspended chords moving in parallel, as we have grown to love, replied by the timpani. After another set of suspended chords, the harmony arpeggiates out before resolving on an extremely uncertain B dominant 7 flat 9. This and the next clip, by the way, are the 2 others heard in the mysterious 62 beats per minute. Our final 2 clips come both from Part 2. The first is when the Doctor escapes from the President's office and goes walkabout. The second is a subsequent corridor skulking scene with Leela shadowing him. First, a final urgent iteration of the theme, intricately harmonized over a pedal E natural. Immediately following this is a satisfying nod to the motive, with all 4 melodic notes held, as in the first movement. At last, the final clip is but a reflection of the theme, echoing its harmony. It triumphantly resolves from minor to major, with a darkly colorful melodic phrase above, bringing us to complete renewal. Thank you very, very much for watching episode 38, part 2 of the Dudley Simpson is Doctor Who project. In the next video, there's 2 things left to do. I'm planning to share with you some final thoughts about Simpson and his theme and motive. And of course, to enjoy the score in all its glory. Subscribe, like, share, and comment. See you next time.